This isn't my final video on the Vega interior modeling project, but this may be my last of the initial videos where I set up the model itself. Subsequent work to be done after this will be the UV map and the textures, plus, if possible, correcting the measurements. I'd like to do that, but we'll have to see if I can find drawings for it. In the meantime, I'm super detailing the, if you could call it super detailing, the steering wheel, as you can see here, because the shape of the center and only spoke is a more complicated shape than merely a box. I said this earlier. The center of it, I don't know what you would say. It sticks out a little bit from the rest. And as you'll see in the texturing, it has a Vega logo on it. I'm going to have to find a picture of a Vega logo to put on it. And I'm also in this video trying to correct its proportions along with the column itself to the extent that that's possible. Because initially it became too fat when I tried to put the center bulge in. Now here I'm making a second attempt at it. Which may be a little bit more accurate. I hope it is. Next, I put in this cylinder, which will actually be the ignition switch. It was basically a judgment call whether I was going to include this, because I, as of right now, have not decided about whether I'll add knobs to the dashboard. This is because it might be far more practical to make them part of the texture, especially because it is likely that this model will not be interactive in any game that I use it in. It's more likely to be either a scenery object or the model for a car that you drive with a entirely separate interface, as in Redline or Torx or a game like that. I may have to improve the detailing if in fact this ends up in Street Rod 3, because it looks as if, because it's a street rodding game, it will involve a fair amount of interaction with the car, so it will have to have an engine bay, things like that. So there's the ignition switch going into place. At least proportionally, that should be about the right size. Again, in actual inches, we'll have to see to find some real drawings. The next will be the directional switch, once I get that moved into the correct position there. A little bit more moving to go there. Next will be the directional switch, which will be another cylinder stretched and scaled way down to be spindly. It'll be horizontal. I actually have tilted it up a little bit in the final version because that's often how they're placed in actual cars. I will have to take a very careful look at my Vega photos to determine whether that should be the final position. So it's going to have to be stretched. Obviously, this will not be the final size. Scale it down. Again, this will not be the final size. Scale and stretch, scale and stretch, same as before. All the other shafts. The end of General Motors directional switches in the 70s was usually tapered out. So I'm going to add a subdivision to do that. You'll see how I do that in a few minutes here. First, I have to put the base of the shaft into place. I'm judging the end by the equally arbitrary diameter of the steering wheel. It will look all right that way, but again, the measurements will be as wrong as the measurements of the steering wheel. So scale it down, and that creates a little bit of a taper there just to begin with. I stretch it. In all likelihood, there would be a boxy housing around where the shaft goes into the column in real life. I'm compromising on detail, of course. So there's the tilt, which may or may not be part of the final version. Side view. This is, I should explain what I'm doing here. These holes were left in the sides to make it easier to manipulate the components that I was going to super detail. And now I'm closing the holes, and if you notice the normals, or the side of the faces which you see, are not consistent. And this is a problem that you often run into in Blender when you are building a model, because you're often working from both sides and it misinterprets what you want. Usually these faces are not double-sided, so you have to pick a side, and in this case I would much rather have the inside side, the visible one, because that's all that will matter in the finished product. When you look at the object view and so on in Blender, it just gives you a different shade to warn you. So unless you're familiar with Blender, you don't realize what that means. So here I'm making sure it's all light to indicate consistency. So in any case, this is the end of my initial modeling of the interior. The UV mapping will be next. So I'll see you then.